Well, thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here. My name is Francisco Flores. A group of researchers and I created the project Showing Life Opportunities. And with the goal of this project is promoting the cognitive and non-cognitive skills on students so they might improve their opportunities when they finish secondary school. We are implementing this project in Ecuador because we have a partnership with the Ministry of Education. We started this project on September 2019 and ended in June 2020. However, as you might notice, in the middle was the COVID-19 outbreak. So the COVID-19 outbreak surprised most of the world, and it forces almost 90% of all of the students in the whole world to stay at home to do remote learning, so they couldn't come back to school. All of the schools, most of the schools in the whole world were closed, and it was unclear the response that how the government will overcome this challenge, especially because there was not that much evidence on how remote learning can work. While this was happening, we were implementing our Showing Life Opportunities project in Ecuador. As you can see here in the left is the map of Ecuador, and the red part was the part where we implemented the project. We covered 15,000 students from the 3 last levels of education. We work with 126 schools, and the idea was that while instead of the students have the normal subject of entrepreneurship, in their classroom, they go to the computer laboratory and started to work with our online platform to learn about the courses that we created for them. So our program was completely online, so that was an advantage during this whole time. As I explained you before, the project started on September 2019. During September, we run a baseline survey, and we collect more than 150 observable and not observable variables in order to balance our sample. So we were able to run an RCT and identify the causal effect of the entire program on students' behavior. However, in the middle, as I explained before, it was the COVID-19 outbreak. So that is the focus of this presentation, to understand how the content that we have provided to the kids starting on September 2019 affect their behavior during the pandemic. We try to identify this by learning how they use their time during the curfew, how they plan for the future, and how they manage their mental health and stress. So what's the Showing Life Opportunities project? It is with this project, we try to promote entrepreneurship and STEM careers through online education. So we provide online courses, role model videos, and career and labor related information. The idea was that students would get these skills, and with these skills, they can make a more informed decision when they finish secondary school. The interesting part of this course was that the entrepreneurial courses, we base our entrepreneurial courses in psychological insights. So the idea was to try to modify their intrinsic knowledge instead of, so we create active students. The idea is that this will be a student that not only it's not a passive students with only wait for the things coming, but they are active and they try to create their own opportunities and seize these opportunities. So we try to modify beliefs, intentions, and in the end, actions for personal and professional life. Ideally, the good thing of promoting these soft skills is that the information that they are getting, they can use it for professional life. Of course, for instance, for creating a new company, and we know that we have evidence that using these tools for running a company is good because it can increase revenues, profits, and also the behavior of managing behavior of the business owners. However, they also, given that they are in a very young age, they can also use this for a personal life. And I will explain you a bit more about this in the next slide. And also we try to identify if this course create a long-lasting effect on students. So as I said, we run an RCT and we compare some treated group of students against a placebo group of students. The treated group received the courses of personal initiative and negotiation, while the placebo get courses on Spanish, grammar, and English as a foreign language. The personal initiative course compress information on self-starting behavior. So try to act instead of way that the things comes. So you act in order to create your own opportunities. Future orientation, that the students should try to identify what's coming in the future, the benefits and challenges that they will have in the future, they will face in the future. And persistent, if they fall, they should stand up and keep trying, because that is essential part of entrepreneur. And in the case of negotiation, we teach them collaborative strategies, so they are prone to create win-win situations. Interpersonal persuasion, try to identify how the other person thinks and what are the goals of the other person in order to align my goals with the other person's goals. And finally, competitive bargain, on how to behave when they have several people competing for a specific element. So as you can see, all of these elements can be very helpful for if you become an entrepreneur and start a business, but it also can be helpful if you in your personal life. One clear example in negotiation is that potentially you can use these strategies with your romantic partner in order to delay a sex encounter or ask him to use a contraceptive. So what did we do for this specific part? So we choose a stratified sample. We choose the sample of the schools which receive this treatment and placebo courses. As I explained before, we also try to promote the STEM careers. That's why it's not the 126 schools, but only 88. These 88 schools get entrepreneurial training and placebo training. So we were able to compare clearly and identify the effect of the training in the behavior of these students. It comprised 176 classes and some population of 4,163 students. However, we randomly select 2,412 students for specifically a survey. We called them, at that time it was a curfew in Ecuador, so we couldn't survey in face-to-face, so we make phone calls, and we have more than 1,550 effective phone calls in our sample, which is 65% of the whole sample. We started on March 31st to May 3rd, and the response rate was more than 70%. We have very low refusal, and the main issue was that potentially, that in some cases we couldn't connect with the phone of the students. However, we use several tools. For instance, we rely also on WhatsApp calls and other kind of approaches, to get as much as students as we can. So this is an extract of how the survey funds in Ecuadorian students. The idea, we use the American Time Usage survey in order to identify how students use their time during the curfew. So we asked them starting on yesterday 4 o'clock in the morning to today 4 o'clock in the morning, what did you do? And we asked these actions every 30 minutes. So we were able to create a distribution on how they use their time. I will show you in a minute the results, so you will see how we get this. So what we tried to identify was first how the entrepreneurial training will lead the students to be more likely to spend the time pursuing activities that benefit their long-term schooling goals. If the entrepreneurial training will lead the students to plan more, if this training will improve mental health during the time of crisis, and if the training leads the students to pursue more ideas for making money during the crisis. And see what's the effect, because it's uncertain, the effect if they prepare or not for university, because if they are starting to do more, to try to make more money, maybe they forgot or they let apart the options to come to go to university. So the empirical method was simple linear regression, where y is the variable that measures the outcome of interest for a student I in school J. The TJ is equal to 1 if students at the school J were assigned to receive the treatment courses. We introduced a strata, which is a vector of randomization strata units. And we also use the post-double selection lasso approach in order to select the controls which correlate the most with the outcome variable in order to get very accurate estimators, and also it helps us to boost the power of the sample. The results, well, as you can see clearly from this graph, we see that the internet, I will start with descriptive results, and then I will show you the experimental results. So first, you can see clearly here how the internet plays a major role on remote learning. So at least 22% of the students who didn't have internet at home didn't engage in any school work during the curfew. And this is very important because Ministry of Education create content, create online content, but also they create content for TV and radio. And we see that at least 92% of the students have access to TV and radio. However, not having internet reduced engagement on the school work. Here is the results that we get from this kind of questions that I explained before. So we were able to recreate the distribution on how they spend their time, and we can see that again that not having internet reduce the time that they spend on education, but increase the time on working and household tasks. This is especially clear for females because females spend more time on household tasks and boys more times on working. So they are very specific, very strict gender roles here. And some warnings that we also said to the Ministry of Education is that, for instance, 12% of the students claim in March, April that they might not come back to school. So that's a very big problem, especially if we consider what happened in Liberia or Sierra Leone with the Ebola crisis. Finally, we try to identify, we use the 5-item MHI index from Bait and War in order to identify the mental well-being of the students. The state top was 25 points. However, we use a threshold for major depression of 17 points. And the result is that 16% of the full sample that we had can have this major depression, especially in females, which is 19% of the sample. We might guess that due to the COVID-19 outbreak, this depression increased because the first previous results for a first-year college students, which are kind of similar to these students, was only 6% of depression, but now is 16% of potentially it increased. However, we cannot say for sure because it was not the same kind of students. So now I'm going to show you the experimental results. The first hypothesis was that this training, the treatment training, will lead the students to be more likely to spend the time pursuing activities that benefit their long-term schooling goals. And we see that yes, actually it is helping students who got the treatment courses spend additional time on voluntary learning. We get that at least on average, they spend 15 minutes more on voluntary learning than the control students. And as voluntary learning, we mean that it's reading books, magazines, and articles, viewing or listening to content on TV, radio, YouTube, or any other online or offline platforms. And they learn about options for college careers during this time. We use an index in order to we use a summary index for multiple hypothesis testing, and we see that it is also significant in this case. So if you want to take one screenshot of this whole presentation, I think will be this one, where you can see clearly how the treated students spend more time in voluntary learning, and they reduce their time on working and doing household tasks, which potentially can say something also related to the courses that we provide. The second is that if entrepreneurial training will lead the students to plan more, and we see that this can be true as well, because these students are setting plans for the next day instead of just taking the day as it comes, which means that potentially they are introducing this this plan setting in their habits, and also tell us something related to future orientation. The entrepreneurial training will didn't have any effect, at least in this specific sample, on mental health, so I cannot say much on that. But one very important hypothesis also that we have is that if this entrepreneurial training will lead the students to pursue more ideas for making money during the crisis. Let's remember that the whole idea of this course was, of this intervention, was to promote entrepreneurship among the students. So we try to see if during this time they are trying to think about ways on how they can create, have a business ideas. And we see that the students that got the treatment actually were thinking about starting a new business. Maybe they didn't do anything because of the curfew, we don't know, but at least they are thinking about creating a business idea during this time. And it was uncertain if they will did some preparation for entering to college, enter to college. So we see that it was the effect of the treatment was positive, was effective actually. We see that more than 43% of the students in the treatment group think about activities to start a college career, and also the two times the control group students in the treatment group pursue activities for starting a university. So we see that the students are thinking and are trying and actually doing some actions to start a college career, which is already good. So as a conclusion, I can say that first, internet is essential to enforce remote learning. Otherwise, some students might lag behind. So this is a very clear message for the decision makers. COVID-19 outbreak might increase the levels of major depression among teenagers. We don't know for sure, but it might be the case. And related to our treatment effects, we can see that the students devote additional 15 minutes on average per day in voluntary schoolwork. Unfortunately, the sample was not that big enough to identify heterogeneous effects, but at least on average, we know that they are spending 15 additional time for voluntary schoolwork. They reduce their household and work-related time, which might tell us something related to negotiation. Maybe they are negotiate with parents or peers or siblings in order to reduce the time doing these other activities for going for education. And also 17% of students are introducing planning in the daily routine. Finally, we see that the students, that the program motivates the students to think about new business ideas, and it also motivates them to think about options for college careers, not just thinking about that, but also engaging in some activities to pursue this goal. Well, that's the presentation. Thank you so much for attending. I will now stop sharing and Happy to answer all your questions, your comments. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Francisco, for your presentation. Now we'll have 5 minutes Q&A. If you have any questions, you can unmute yourself. So we have Francesco. Francesco, can you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Okay, thanks for the presentation. Very interesting. I was thinking that since probably data collection took time, those that you interview at the end were more exposed to quarantine and all the COVID crisis. So if you have checked if there is difference across the timing of the data collection, and maybe even, you know, I don't know how informative it is in terms of the causal impact, but it would be interesting to check if the effect is different when you look at people, you know, that has been more or less exposed to quarantine or lockdown and so on. So, you know, if the difference at the beginning of the data collection are different from the difference at the end of the data collection, to see if you know, you have some positive effect even on those that were more exposed.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for the questions. Yes, answering your first question, yes, we would try to control for the timing that we implement the survey to identify how the behavior is changing while they spend more time during quarantine. However, we didn't see any significant difference between this. We actually ran several tests and we didn't see any significant effects. In this case, we implement this survey during March to May 2019. During this time, the state close to the capital was the most affected during in the sample that we have. So we try to identify the effects there. However, unfortunately, the sample was not that big enough to have this heterogeneous effect to see if the students who were more exposed or the places that was more exposed to the COVID-19 behave in a different way. Yeah, so I cannot tell you that much on this case. However, we saw that for our full sample that there was no difference among the responses from the beginning of the survey and the end of the survey. It was very similar during the entire time of the study.
Do we have any more questions?
Just to emphasize something also related to the treatment was that during the quarantine in Ecuador, the Minister of Education didn't make the school time voluntary. It was not mandatory during the curfew while we introduced this study. So that also tell us, give us even a bit more importance in the fact that we collect, because even that students were not, it was not mandatory for them to attend to classes. They were trying to do some activities in order to keep learning during the curfew until they realize what will happen at the end. The classes resume on May 1st. So during the time that we were implementing this study, it was voluntary learning.
All right, thank you, Francisco. Next, we have Fedor Golubov from the Laboratory of Economic Behavior of the Center of Psychoeconomics Researches of SBRIA, branch of RANEPA, with a presentation called the Information Processing Styles in Adoption to New Institutions, Investigations with Eye Tracking Technology.
One moment, please. Yeah, could you see my screen? Yes, it's okay?
Yes, it is okay.
Yes, okay then. So hi everyone, my name is Fedor Golubev, and today I would like to present our joint effort with Alexander Neverov, Anastasia Neverova, and Anna Magalyan from Russia, Saratov. And yes, in our work, we try to answer the questions how economic agents work with the economic informations. And for understanding our topic, we explain our motivation. In our work, we divided 3 positions which economists and psychologists use for explaining how economic agents work with the different economic information. The first position, this is classic economic positions, that everybody has the equal capabilities of work with any information in the economics. And the second, that the information processing styles does matter. Kahneman, Tversky, and other researchers show it. And the first position, that rules and norms determinate frames of economic behavior. But we didn't find a common position for understanding this situation. And for our research, we choose 1 main questions which we want to explain how the information processing styles are related to absorptions of rules and norms in the economic situations. For understanding how economic agents work with the economic informations, we organized a 2-part lab experiment. And the first part of the experiment included the rules reading. And yeah, the participant could choose how they would like to work with the economic informations on the paper or on the screen of the computer with the eye tracker. The economic informations on the paper and the economic informations on the screen was same. And yeah, the participant were warned that this information, this economic information, comprise the rules of the next stage of the second part of the experiment, this economic activity. And the participant didn't have time limits for reading, for understanding this information. And yeah, the second part of the experiment was the economic decision making. The participant must sell or buy 10 different goods. They have equal start date, 20,000 rubles, and after experiment they got guaranteed reward 200 rubles, and 1 more if the final state were more at the start state, they could get more money. For example, if the final state were 21,000 rubles, the participant could get 10 rubles more. And we analyzed how they work with these informations. And the first method include analysis of universals indicator of the eye tracking records. That means average duration of fixation at saccade, number of fixation and saccade logical zones, and other. And the second method included analysis of zones informations through the allocation of logical zones in the stimulus material, in the economic information, and by dividing the rules into numbered square cells of a fixed size. Now you can see a main characteristic of participant. Total, we analyzed 35 records, 35 eye tracker records, and average age was 23 age, and you can see gender, and participant could read the rules on 2 languages, and you can see that the informations on Russian or English language was a little different, because this information were with different characters with spaces, number of words and offers, but main point that all information included just 12 logical zones. Yeah, one of the most significant parameters for the typology of economic agents according to the criterion of working with economic information is the total duration of the absorptions of information and structure of the transition from one event to another. Each event, we suppose that this parameter indirectly indicates the speed of information processing and assimilation of it as knowledges. Now you can see the first method. Here on the first picture, you can see the first method of analysis, how the participant works with logical zones. And the second pictures show how we dividing the rules into number scales. And here you can see universal indicators of fixations, saccade, and unclassified events of recording. Yes, fixations, it means that participant stop on this point, and saccade, this is directions of between one fixations and other. To highlight the styles of work with information clustering of a timestamp among all respondents was carried out by words method. The processing of the eye tracking data was carried out based on the calculation of the speed of eye tracking movements behind the objects. You can see that we get 4 styles of work with economic informations. On how you can see on the table, the biggest styles is style number 4, and the smallest is style number 2. On the next stage, we analyzed all indicators of each styles. So you can see universals indicator of each styles. When work with information with a total volume of characters containing focused of assimilations with the institutional design of the upcoming economic activity and containing only information relevant to this activity. Yeah. How you can see that the style number 1 and style number 4 have a biggest duration of second, and style number 4 has a biggest duration of fixations. After the first stage, to clarify the characteristic of the selected styles and analysis of the structure and duration parameter of an individual types of events was carried out. On average, for all events, participants spend most of their time working with information in destruction from the information itself that is spending time on its reception, generalization, analysis, synthetics, and additional processing. In second place, this was fixations on individual block of information. The remaining 12% falls on the transition from one block to another. Yeah, the first styles is characterized by greatest time spent on fixing on blocks and elements of this information field, and the last for destruction from the information field by generalization information. The second styles closed to the aggregate average structure. However, it differs in a smaller proportion of the time spent on transitions and slightly larger proportions of including events. The third style is characterized by an excess of the time spent on fixations and saccade relative to the average values for all subjects, and shorter time relative to, as shown above. The third style also demonstrate the small share of switching between blocks, saccade, and among all types. And the fourth styles, in terms of the share of time spent on different events, is similar in its characteristic of the first style. However, in contrast to it, it has the largest share of concentration and the smallest share destruction from informations. And now I would like to speak about areas of the attention matrix. Based on the results of the clustering analysis, we divided the participants by styles and analyzed the duration of their work with each of the tones when dividing information into equal square blocks. The first styles attract the most attention to information from the second row in the left and middle segment. Then in the first row in the middle and left segment. For the second styles of agents, information from the second row also attracts the most attention, but the weight of attention in the rows starts from the middle segment. The third style of agents focuses on the second row, and the fourth styles of agent place emphasis on the second and third rows of the information field. That's according to the areas of the attention matrix. The selected types of work with economic information have general and special characteristics. Common to all subjects is the emphasis on the second row of the information field. Special attention is paid to additional segment. So the first type focuses on the uppers. I think we can go to the styles conclusions. You can see, yeah, okay, thank you. You can see all characteristics, all main characteristic in each styles, and what is the different. We got information that the first styles work more with the economic informations, and on the next stage of the analysis we analyzed the economic activity. I mean, which styles have more profitable economic activity, and we got these results that start capital was 20,000 games ruble, and if the participant, if the final state were less as no rubles, it means that participants were bankrupt. It's the second point. If the participant has games money between 0 rubles and 20,000 rubles, they was server and profitable if the participant has more than 20,000 games rubles. How you can see that the four styles have more profitable participants as other styles, and how you can see on these characteristics that the four styles showed highest level of concentration of attention with work with economic informations. And how you can see here that more percent of third styles have a bankrupt, and on these characteristics the third styles characterized by greater stack on the information block and the less generalization and synthetic nature of the information field. And we suppose that our research and our conclusion confirmed by the results of styles of economic profitable, and we hope that our research could help to divide it different styles and how the participant work with information, how the participant could use the informations, and maybe this is actual for our modern world today, how the economic agents could more profitable understanding these informations. It's all. Yes, thank you for your attention. I try to answer on your questions. Okay. If you have questions, please.
Okay, Francesco has a question, so please, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thanks, very interesting. I'm sure you're familiar with the paper by Polonio and Coricelli on pattern of visual acquisition of information, but also use eye tracking. I was just wondering if you have thought to run some session and try to prime participant to use a certain, like to focus on certain area of attention to prime them towards the style that you have identified, and then check if you know, profitability goes in the direction of your correlation. That would be interesting also to suggest something about causality.
Mm. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm sorry. I don't understand it. It was a questions about correlations or not?
No, I mean,
explain.
You can try to prime participant to focus, you know, towards some of the style of processing information that you have identified, like, you know, prime someone to be more style 5 or style 4. At least you can do in terms of focusing on the area in the matrix that you associate to each style, and then see if those primes toward a certain style will have more or less profitability. In that case, you can argue something about causality.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, Feder, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, just can you see my screen? Hello?
Yes, we see.
Okay, thank you. Okay, for the last presentation of this session, I'm gonna give well, this presentation is gonna be about a paper that we recently published in the Journal of the Economic Science Association, and it has been co-authored with Francesco Oliacino. So its title is Do Negative Economic Shocks Affect Cognitive Function, Adherence to Social Norms, and Loss Aversion? First, I want to give you a brief definition of what a negative economic shock is. So economic shocks, economists call them situations that usually affect the income flow when the income flow is reduced. In this case, this is a negative income shock. And a negative wealth shock is a situation in which the value of the assets that is held is reduced as well. Now, shocks are usually studied in the context of natural disasters. Of course, we're well aware of the negative economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. They're also studied on the context of exposure to violence and internal displacement, and of course, in the context of poverty. And poverty is usually associated with counterproductive behavior. So poor people tend to use contraceptives in a lower proportion, or they tend to raise their children in a more inconsistent and punitive way. Or they also tend to solve their own financial problems in the office hours. Now, in one of their famous papers of Money and co-authors, they used the natural variation to try to understand what are the effects of scarcity and poverty on cognitive performance. And what they find is that actually these kinds of shocks create a cognitive, do work as a cognitive load. So our main objective was to replicate these results, but in a more controlled setting, that is in a lab experiment. And second, it is not clear how shocks affect behavior. So there is some evidence in the literature also exploiting natural variations in which the income shocks do not affect cheating behavior. And also in a more controlled setting, we do see that shocks affect self-control and time preferences, but we don't know how these shocks can affect preferences in the loss domain. So the main objective of this paper was to find about the differentiated and joint effects of shocks on cognitive function, and if this cognitive toll could affect in any way preferences, behavior, specifically in the loss domain or in cheating behavior. Of course, we wanted to do this, as I mentioned before, in a more controlled environment, whereas most of the papers have studied this in exploiting natural variations. So our outcome variables were 3: cognitive performance, cheating, which is a proxy of dishonesty, and loss aversion. And to do this, we decided to use a 2x2 experimental design in which we induced negative wealth shocks and negative income shocks in the lab by using a comparison between subjects. And what we got with this experiment is that it is the negative wealth shocks that actually lower cognitive performance between an 18 and a 25% of a standard deviation with respect to control. However, we didn't find any effect on cheating or on loss aversion. So first, I want to talk to you a little bit about the outcome variables that we wanted to measure. I'm going to start by cognitive function. So cognitive function is the ability to process information in order to perform in tasks of reasoning, learning, and comprehension. And it relies on processes that are neither intuitive nor automatic, which is something that Kahneman in his Tale of Two Systems refers to as System 2. Now, literature has shown us that the human cognitive capacity is of limited, the human cognitive system is of limited capacity, and that differences in cognitive capacity determine our ability to make decisions, ultimately affecting behavior. So this is consistent with what I just mentioned, this paper from Mani and co-authors published in Science on the effects of poverty and scarcity on cognitive performance. So we would expect that participants who are exposed to negative economic shocks in our sample will have their cognitive performance reduced accordingly. The second variable is dishonesty. So dishonesty is a moral infraction that is motivated by the obtainment of a potential benefit or the reduction of a potential harm. And this dynamic has been captured by what in economics and psychology is called the cheating game, which is just an incentivized task that can be used in the lab as well as in the field. But why did we pick the cheating game to study dishonesty? Well, first, we picked it because it doesn't require interaction with participants. So it is better for us to avoid having some other confounds, such as other regarding preferences. And the second reason is because it has a clear social norm attached to it, that is not to cheat, you know. Now, how do negative economic shocks affect cheating behavior? Well, first, they can either shift normative or empirical expectations, which are, according to Bicchieri, they shift beliefs. They are just behaviors that can be affected by the beliefs of what I think others will do, which are called empirical expectations, or the beliefs of what others think that it should be done, which are called normative expectations. The second reason why shocks could affect cheating behavior is because, in the sense that adherence to these social norms is a prosocial behavior, and prosociality is a normal good, well, shocks can actually increase the opportunity cost of adherence to these social norms. And the third one is that negative economic shocks could actually change the relative magnitude of cost and benefits of cheating, which is consistent with the rational models of crime that are used in the economics literature. And our last outcome variable was loss aversion, which is the cornerstone of prospect theory. And it refers to assigning a larger weight to losses than to gains of equal magnitude, but with respect to a reference point. So because shocks, by making a loss salient, could push someone below the reference point, they could actually shift risk preferences in the loss domain, increasing, of course, risk aversion. So how did we do to measure the effects of negative economic shocks on the outcome variables that I just explained? Well, first we had participants performing a real effort task, which will become clearer in just a second. And then we randomly assigned participants to 4 different treatments in a 2x2 design. So there were some participants who were randomly assigned to the negative income shock condition, some who were assigned to the negative wealth shock condition. There were others who were assigned to both shocks at the same time, and some others were in the control condition in which they suffered no shocks at all. Then we had participants performing a short-term memory task and a fluid intelligence task, which comprises the cognitive part of this design. And then we had a loss aversion task and a cheating game. So the first task, the real effort task, which was instrumental for the introduction of the experimental treatments. So in this task, participants had 2 rounds of 4 minutes each to solve as many mathematical problems as they could. And for each correct answer that they got, they earned 1,000 points. Then we randomly assigned them to the experimental treatment. So for the negative wealth shock part of it, participants saw their earnings accumulated in the first round of this task reduced by half. So if they had 10,000 points at the end of the first round, they will have 5,000 points accumulated. Some others were assigned to the negative income shock condition. So the piece rate for the second round of the real effort task was reduced by half. If they were earning 1,000 points per correct answers in the first round, they will be earning now 500 points. Those that were in the condition in which were exposed to both shocks will saw their earnings and their accumulated earnings and the piece rate for the second round affected accordingly. And those in the control condition didn't saw their earnings affected in any way. After this, participants performed in the short-term memory task, in which they were shown the set of 20 geometrically impossible images for 30 seconds. And after that, in sets of 3, they were asked which one of the 3 was the image that was shown previously in the initial set. For each correct answer, they earned 1 experimental currency unit. And for the fluid intelligence task, participants had to complete a sequence of logical images, and they were shown on the bottom some options, and they had to complete it. And for each correct answers, again, they earned 1 experimental currency unit. Now, for the cheating game, we followed the standard procedure of Fickbacker and Folmy-Hoyse, in which participants had to roll the die in complete anonymity. And one important thing about this task is that participants could actually lie. So they had to report the number that they had rolled, but the number reported determined their payment according to this table that I'm showing you here. So it is increasing, the payment is increasing in the number reported, except for number 6, in which they earned 0 experimental currency units. And the last task that we introduced was the standard loss aversion task based on a multiple prize list, in which participants had to decide whether to play or not to play a series of lotteries in which they introduced the possibility of losing something. And the important thing about this task is that it allows us to have an estimate of the loss aversion parameter, because, well, the lotteries are organized in decreasing expected value. So when a participant switches from playing lotteries to not playing lotteries, it gives you a sense of the degree of loss aversion that a participant has. 2 important things to mention about this design is that first, we have 5 different tasks, and because the first one was instrumental for the introduction of the experimental treatments, we always had to pay this one. But for the remaining 4, we randomly draw one of them for participants to earn the money that they have earned in this task. And secondly, if you notice, I was talking about points in the real effort task and experimental currency units for the other remaining 4 tasks. This was, for us, this was important to introduce because we didn't want participants to get confused about like the shocks. They could understand that from going to 1,000 points to 500 points and then again going back to 1,000 points, it will be a positive shock. So to separate these 2 different groups of tasks, we decided to use different currency units. And participants on average were earning $6. And now I'm gonna start with the presentation of the results. So in order to avoid multiple hypothesis testing in the cognitive performance test, we standardized the score in each of the 3 tasks that have a cognitive load. So it is the second round of the real effort task, the short-term memory task, and the fluid intelligence task. We standardized it by dividing the score of each participant by the standard deviation, and then we pull them together with equal weights, creating what we call a cognitive index. So what I'm going to show you here is the experimental treatments. This one is the control treatment. This one is the negative income shock treatment only, the negative wealth shock treatment only, and both shocks at the same time. Because we standardized the score, it means that the mean is standardized at 0. And the gray bars are showing the difference between the group mean and the particular treatment score mean. And what we see here is that it is the people who are in the negative wealth shock condition and those that are exposed to both shocks at the same time that have a significantly reduced cognitive performance. Now, this result is consistent when we actually control removing the first round of the real effort task, or when we analyze these results by separate. So that is this first round of the second round of the real effort task, the short-term memory task, and the fluid intelligence task by its own. And it is consistent as well with when we use the first component of a principal component analysis. And of course, when we want to test if there is any treatment effect on the first round of the real effort task, we don't find any effects. Now I'm showing you the average response time per group, and even though if the only result that is significant is that negative wealth shock and negative income shock at the same time condition. For this condition, participants take longer. We can see that there is a trend, like if in some sense shocks do have a different degree of effect on response time. Then for the other tasks, especially for the loss aversion task, we have different results, different ways of showing this result. One of them is the percentage of loss averse in the sample, and the degree of loss aversion, which removes people who have multiple switching points. And one measure, which is the number of rejected lotteries, doesn't allows us to include in our analysis those who were having multiple switch points. What we find here is that we don't have any results here. There is some degree of loss aversion in our sample, but it doesn't have any differentiated effects between treatments. And the last result is the cheating game. So in the cheating game, even though if participants are lying, they do not do it in a differentiated way between shocks. Now, by a recommendation of one of the referees, they told us to perform an equivalence test to see if there is actually a true zero effect for both loss aversion and dishonesty. We ran the test, and indeed we found that it is a true zero. Now, for the concluding remarks, I would like to say that what we do find is that negative economic shocks do have a cognitive load. and that this effect is differentiated between negative income shocks and negative wealth shocks. So negative wealth shocks are the ones that are driving this effect, and at least this is from the lab. To the best of our knowledge, this is one of the first papers that try to identify this effect in the lab, because previous literature has, as I mentioned before, has tried to exploit these variations, these effects, by exploiting natural variations. And the second thing that we find is that negative economic shocks in the lab do not affect cheating nor loss aversion. One thing worth mentioning is that actually losing like $5 in the lab is not going to be compared to real life shocks, such as like losing your job or having your house burned down. But this should warn us about that we're estimating a lower bound of this effect. Okay, so that's it. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, now is the time.
Hi, I have a question.
Yep.
Did you maybe, it was possible for you to identify if the effect in the games was different based on the initial endowment that the participants get? So as I understood, they have this real effort task, so it was different between them, the initial endowment, is correct? Or?
Well, it could be the case that, of course, participants had some variation in the performance that they did, and of course, it affects what they had earned in this task. But because we were measuring means and not actual like individual participants, we cannot see any differentiated effects between like those who were maybe doing less addition tasks and those who were having a better performance. And actually, when we tested, there is no difference between when we control for performance for the first round. So when participants, I mean, we had two tasks, a first round and the second round of the real effort task. And when we test these effects in the first round of the real effort task, there is no difference. So I don't know if that answered your question.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay.
So I was wondering if there is a different in effect, whether the cognitive load is coming from economic shock or other type of, other type of shocks, like the psychology literature is using usually other things to create cognitive load. I was wondering if they find different things, and is that different from the psychology literature?
Well, there is actually we have a paper on the effects of COVID-19, and of course we use a different method to measure the effects of cognitive load. So in this sense, this paper is trying to exploit the real effort task in order to to have people have some money, like actual money that they have earned in a task. And then what we use is a short-term memory task and a fluid intelligence task in order to see how they perform after they have been shocked. But there is some other literature, as I mentioned in the paper about COVID-19 effects, that uses, for example, a survey or some questions about how they feel, how tired they feel about some sort of shock. In this case, the COVID-19. And what we use here is that in the other paper is that people usually report that they lost their jobs, for example, or that they presented some sort of health problem that reduced something, And then we used a cognitive test in which they had to, like the standard test in which they had to guess which number is greater than the other one, or how much is worth something, for example. It is called the cognitive reflection test.
Yeah, so my question is a cognitive load that is coming from an economic shock different from a cognitive load that is coming from a different source? That's basically the question. Is there something special about having kind of stress or cognitive load that is economic in nature than other ones? So in other words, if you were to use some kind of short memory task or whatever to create some load, whether the cheating, for instance, in the cheating game, would that be different than if you create a cognitive load that is coming from an economic source?
Well, no, it should be the same cognitive load. I mean, the effects are the same in the sense that if the shocks are related to health or to economics. So it depends. I mean, the shock can be the same, but the mechanisms in which they may be working, they may be different. But in a general sense, the shocks should be the same. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, if I can complement, just to, I mean, since I'm co-authoring both papers, so when on the other paper we measured like different types of shock, both health related and income related, and the cognitive effect is the same. So we cannot say if you know, this similarity extend to other behaviors. Also because in reality here we have a zero effect on cheating. And so, you know, that's the best we could do. Of course, in the COVID paper, the shocks are not randomly administered. So in that case, it's just that they predict the same negative performance in cognitive task. And we don't have, in that case, cheating behavior.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so we're done basically. We'll give you a few minutes before I close the session in case you want to talk to each other or give emails or something, and then I will end the session.
Francesco, are you still there?
Yeah. Sorry, I was actually writing to you. Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, I think I found something something that can explain a bit better the question that you do. So I don't know if you can see my screen now.
Yeah.
Yep. So look, you can see here how it was the differentiation on how students spend their time during the different weeks that we were collecting the information for the sample. And as you can see, there was no that major difference. We can see just a bit, but it was not significant difference between the while we were collecting the information and while the curfew was getting worse. So we didn't see effects here. And also I will show you these effects in mental health. So it also indicates the date of the interview and the proportion of the students indicating their the answer of the questions. So the results, as you can see, did not vary that much. So it keeps stable among the weeks that we introduced this. Maybe now it's worse because COVID-19 is still a big issue in Ecuador. So we are going to do some follow-ups also to check what's going on now, especially now that the intervention ends. But hopefully this gives you a more illustrated answer to your questions.
Yeah, but actually my issue was it would be interesting to see if people that were trained by you is more able to cope with the negative consequences, like to look at some sort of interaction. But if you're going to do a follow-up now, then it would make more sense to do this heterogeneity right now.
Yep.
That would be important for your policy implication.
Yeah, actually that's the idea, and we already collect one first follow-up, and now we have 7,000 students, so it will be that I think will allow us to do some heterogeneous effect and see how it is affecting, especially because the COVID-19 in Ecuador started in the coast, but now it's coming to the highlands, so it's getting worse in the sample that we were studying. I think that definitely we will find something there.
Cool, nice paper in that case.
Thank you. I will send you to your email. I just saw your message.
Bye bye everybody.